Non. Ah oui. Bonjour. Oui. Bonjour. J'attendais justement un petit moment.
Good afternoon. I was waiting for you.
Oui, oui. En face, oui, ou même ici. Je pense que. Ben non, oui, on a 2 minutes de retard, mais en fait, on vous attendait un petit peu.
We're just a couple of minutes late, but we were waiting for you. I think time has come to kick off this meeting. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to welcome you all here today. I'm very happy to organize this event with the Coalition for Fair Fishery Agreements Association, which has organized the arrival of all the artisanal fishermen and women here. And Catherine Chabot is here with me. We have 8 fishermen and fisherwomen from 8 different countries, and I might pronounce your names not in the right way. Ahmed Mukhtar Hamed from Madagascar, Antonia Adama from Guinea-Bissau, Nancy Marcia from Seychelles, Gaosu from Senegal, Dorsas Kilola from Kenya, Aruna Lebe from Mauritania, Raisa Nadeja from the Ivory Coast, and James Judex from Mauritius. This event is the opportunity to start a discussion on fishery agreements that the EU signs with coastal countries, specifically EU Sustainable Fisheries Partnership Agreements. But this is an opportunity to have a broader exchange on the impact of European fishing on the international scene and on developing coastal countries and their coastal communities. This session is being translated into French, English, and Portuguese. Hopefully you can hear the translation. Can you hear the translation? Hopefully you can. So Portuguese is working great. So this event brings to a close a week of meetings between the small-scale fishermen and fisherwomen and the women processors who are present here today, and the European stakeholders and representatives of the EU and the EC. We're delighted to welcome you here to the European Parliament. And what is a Sustainable Fisheries Partnership Agreement? The European Union signs fisheries agreements with many countries, and more than 20 fisheries agreements have been signed. The conclusion of an agreement between the EU and a third country allows a limited number of European vessels access to foreign waters to fish for surplus fish resources. Fisheries agreements have evolved over time. At the very beginning, it was really like a blank check. Progress has been made over the last few decades to take into account the sustainability of fishing in the countries and the development of small-scale fishing. Part of the payments made by the EU now take the form of support for the sustainable development of fisheries in the partner country. These funds are to be used to support small-scale fishing and local communities and to finance infrastructure, scientific monitoring, and so on and so forth in the communities. These agreements include fisheries control and transparency measures. This is essential because coastal states are signing agreements with countries that
très impliqués dans la pêche illégale. Alors, ces accords de pêche, comme je le disais, ils ont eu des améliorations, mais ils sont pour moi encore loin d'être parfaitement durables et posent encore énormément de questions sur les rapports avec les pays du Sud dont nous exploitons
whose resources we are exploiting. So we must ensure that food security is not jeopardized by our fishing activities. An example, in West Africa, small-scale fishermen are in competition with foreign fleets, specifically Chinese fleets, to catch small fish that is used to produce fish meal. Although the EU does not produce fish meal, we import a lot for aquaculture, and small pelagics used to make fish meal are normally consumed by local populations. And there are problems in terms of overfishing, specifically in terms of tropical tuna. And European boats are taking part in the overfishing for yellow tuna. And there are forms of competition, specifically in the Seychelles. And then sectoral support should be better tailored to the needs of small-scale fishing communities and coastal communities. Small-scale fishers should be listened to carefully to find solutions that can be tailor-made, because there is a difference between the objectives and the actual funding. It happened in Seychelles, in Senegal, in Guinea-Bissau. And if there are no ambitious
ORGP, des organisations régionales de gestion des pêches, on ne va pas pouvoir résoudre les problèmes existants, c'est-à-dire ce que j'ai dit tout à l'heure, la surpêche, la répartition équitable des ressources tonnières.
Distribution of tuna resources and so on and so forth, which means that we will not achieve balanced partnerships. So this is the external dimension of the common fisheries policy that we need to take into account in our change of approach. Our role as European Parliament is quite limited in these agreements, because we, as MEPs, we do not negotiate these agreements. We just approve them or reject them, because it's up to the Commission to negotiate these agreements with the member states of the EU. And as MEPs, we are responsible for examining them. We can vote for, against, we can abstain, and we can propose recommendations through resolutions. And sometimes there are official missions. We meet fishermen and fisherwomen. And at the beginning of the term, I visited Senegal during an official mission, and I was in charge of several fisheries agreements, specifically with Mauritius, and this agreement has recently been voted, and I had the opportunity to meet these fishermen, and it was very important. As for today's event, we'll be talking about 4 different aspects of fisheries agreements: access to resources, food security, transparency, and sectoral support. I'm going to give the floor to Catherine Chabot for her introduction. After that, I'm going to give the floor to Antonia Adama, who will talk about the call for action, and she will tell us what they did. And she will talk about this action. Catherine? Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak French. It's an honor to welcome you all to the European Parliament. I am Catherine Chabot, and sea is very important to me as the relationship between land and sea. Caroline works in the fisheries field, and We are part of the DEVE committee, and so these fisheries agreements are very important to us. And we are both part of the PESH committee. I'm from Renew, she's from the Greens, so not the same political group, but we do share some visions, and I am part of the ENVI committee as well, and I've had opportunity to visit many countries, Guinea-Bissau, and I recently found a picture of the two of us, and it was a small-scale fishing harbor, and I had opportunity to meet some local communities of women, and I have a picture of the two of us, and we had opportunity to meet. And I visited Senegal too, as Caroline, and I had the opportunity to visit the coastal communities of Joal for Youth about a specific topic, preservation of mangroves and oysters, oyster culture. And during my first mission to Senegal, I had opportunity to meet coastal communities. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to come here. We are here to listen to you. But after Caroline's presentation, I'd like to say that for us, these fisheries agreements are very important tools for the European development policy. And these agreements are very important to achieve SDGs. The SDGs are very important to me, and they should be the backbone of our public policy. And these fisheries agreements help us achieve these sustainable development goals, namely 1, against poverty, 2, access good conditions, 8 or 10 to reduce disparities and inequalities, and fishermen and fisherwomen in these countries should work in good working conditions in line with human rights. And then European fleets shouldn't be an obstacle for the development of local communities. SDG 2 is against hunger. And we do have another responsibility. We should ensure the respect of gender equality. And then these partnership agreements should support sustainable fisheries as part of the SDG 13 against climate change and SDG 14 for the preservation of fauna and flora in the sea. And there are funds which are made available so that these fishery agreements can help local communities. I'm a bit concerned about a topic. I do not know if you're about to deal with it or not. Well, preservation to resources is essential, but there's another topic, pollution. When we visit your countries, we do realize that the pollution level is quite high, as in Europe. Pollution is very high, specifically in the coastal areas, so maybe we should help third countries from this point of view too. The women I met during my visit in Senegal have a project which should be supported, and you are about to talk about the difficulties to export products towards Europe. And I think that you're going to talk about IUU, and so how can we act together? So I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to listen to you today with a regional vision, and thank you for being here.
Merci Catherine. Je vais donner.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I am now going to give the floor to Antonia Damajalo, who will present us the call for action that was published in 2022 for the International Year of Artisanal Fishing and Aquaculture by all small-scale fishermen and women coming from the entire world. So please put your headphones on because Adama will be speaking Portuguese. Adama, just press the red button and you can move the microphone closer to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I have been an artisanal fisherwoman in Guinea-Bissau for over 30 years, and I represent here the African Confederation of Artisanal Fisheries Professional Organizations. This organization, CAOPA, brings together women and men, artisanal, sea and continental fisheries professionals from 29 African countries. We give voice to the women and men of artisanal fisheries in West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, North Africa, and the Indian Ocean. For over 10 years, we have joined forces to ensure that our sector is recognized for its fair value by our decision makers. Little by little, our work is giving confidence to our communities, to our women, so that they can claim their rights to assert their advantages in social, economic, cultural terms, and as managers of coastal ecosystems. In 2022, on the occasion of the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries, together with other artisanal fisheries organizations from Central America, South and North America, Europe and Asia, we launched a call to action for artisanal fisheries. Because despite our efforts, still too often our decision makers and their partners fail to act on our behalf and ignore our needs. On paper, our states and the international community are on our side, and we thank them for it.
Mas na prática,
But in practice, they often favor the interests of some sectors that promise many short-term financial returns, such as industrial fishing, mining and gas exploration, and coastal tourism. All of this poses a threat to the future of our communities. The time to pay lip service is over. Climate change is already knocking on our doors, and more than ever, we need strong and urgent action to enable our communities to meet the challenges and provide a future for our children and our industry. In our call to action, we first ask that artisanal fishermen's access to resources is guaranteed and protected. When no more fish are landed, it is the women who go back home empty-handed, and it is our most vulnerable people who are left with an empty stomach. We demand actions to improve the living and working conditions of women, because when women are struggling, well, that has an impact on families and the whole community. We ask for more transparency in the management of fisheries. Every day, we see more and more industrial fishing vessels of Chinese, Korean, Russian, and European origin in our waters. Licenses are given in a very fragmented method. As our resources are depleted, we want to know why this is possible at all. The public opinion has a right to know who is fishing in our waters and under what conditions. We need this information to participate in informed decisions that affect us directly.
Também
We also ask that artisanal fishing be protected from other sectors of the so-called blue economy, because when industrial fishing dominates, it is our husbands.
On a eu une pause apparemment sur la traduction.
Test, test, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Because when industrial fishing dominates, it is our husbands and our children who actually lose their nets, and sometimes they lose their lives. When luxury hotels take over our lands, it is the women who are, if you want, eliminated. When oil exploration invades small-scale fishing areas, when flour factories take over our fish, well, the victims are women. The European Union maintains privileged relations with African countries in the area of fisheries, in particular through partnership agreements on sustainable fisheries and international development aid partnerships.
colegas
With my colleagues from Senegal, Mauritania, Ivory Coast, Seychelles, Madagascar, Mauritius, and Guinea-Bissau, we discussed for an entire week on the challenges of fisheries relations between the EU and African countries. We have come here to the European Parliament to share our perspective and discuss with you our proposals for the European Union to contribute to the future of African coastal communities. And thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup Adama.
Thank you so much, Adama. I hear you. I can see that your call for action, and you state that we've been ignoring your needs. You were asking for more transparency about taking on the issue of fish meal, and this really brings me back to the four pillars of our discussion. As I said, we will be talking about access to resources to start with. And I will give the floor to Raissa Nadej Mitamadou. She works in Côte d'Ivoire. She's General Secretary of the local association. Raissa, you have the floor. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you our priorities for guaranteeing secure access to fisheries resources for small-scale fishing in line with Sustainable Development Goal 14b. We welcome the fact that since the last reform of the common fisheries policies in 2012, the European Union's policy in fisheries agreement has been not to negotiate access to areas occupied by small-scale fisheries in order to give them exclusive access to inshore fishing zones. This measure should be extended to all foreign fleets. Fisheries agreements contain a non-discrimination clause, under which the partner country commits to apply to all foreign fleets the measures laid down for European fleets, and this includes zoning. In practice, however, this remains a dead letter. Boats and vessels from other countries do not respect our fishing zone. Our fishermen suffer from the incursions of trawlers into coastal areas. If the EU really wants to help protect small-scale fishermen's access to resource, it must be stricter about compliance with this non-discrimination clause. Furthermore, how can the European Union only access the surplus when the data on the overall fishing effort in our waters is unknown. What is more, neither bycatches nor bait catches, which are very often of species targeted by small-scale fishing, are counted. This needs to be rectified.
De bateaux industriels d'origine étrangère qui forment des sociétés mixtes.
From other countries which form joint front companies with nationals of our countries and fly the local flag. But make no mistake, these vessels are still controlled by foreign companies, mainly Chinese, but also Russian or European. These vessels sometimes make incursions into areas reserved for small-scale fishing. The European Union is promoting the creation of joint ventures in its fisheries agreements. We are calling for a regulatory framework to be established for these joint ventures applicable to all foreign vessels, in order to ensure that joint ventures operate transparently and do not compete with small-scale fishing, and also contribute to the development objectives of the concerned countries. In recent years, we have observed that the European Union has increasingly supported the creation of marine protected areas through fisheries agreements. And this phenomenon will undoubtedly increase with the implementation of the 3030 initiative. These protected areas are of vital importance for conserving biodiversity and supporting coastal communities that depend on fishing for their livelihoods. It is vital that the social and economic costs of establishing these areas are taken into account and that communities are directly involved in managing them. The European Union supports marine protected areas, but by doing so, it must ensure that the establishment of these conservation tools is transparent, gender sensitive, and involves the informed participation of coastal communities. Finally, I must mention a fishing technique potentially dangerous to small-scale fishing. We are talking about FADs, fish aggregating devices, more specifically drifting FADs. When they drift towards the SSF zone, they attract all the fish, not just tuna. And this fish is then caught by industrial fishing to the detriment of small-scale fishermen and women. And these FADs can also destroy the environment, such as coral reefs, as well as engines of small-scale fishermen's vessels and boats. A compensation fund should be set up in the agreements for this damage to the environment and to small-scale fishing. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much. We will now tackle pillar number 2 and talk about food security. So Amel Mouta-Gaman is a fisherman in Madagascar. He is an advocate for a local fishermen's network. Thank you.
Oui, légèrement décalé.
Tu coupes.
Peut-être faire une partie, vous traduisez.
Voilà.
Une
Oui.
Comme ça,
vous
vous
oui.
votre micro et vous reprenez à chaque fois.
Ok. Tompoko lahy sy tompoko vavy. Izaho dia mpanjono madinika avy any faritravatra Madagasikara. Toa anireo firenena rehetra aty amin'ny faritra Afrikana dia ny jono madinika no mamatsy trondro betsaka indrindra ireo tsena anatiny sy ho an'ireo Malagasy rehetra. Mampalahelo anefa fa ny enti-manana eo ampelantananay dia tsy ahafahany mamatsy araka ny tokony ho izy ireo tsena ao anatin'ireo.
mesdames et
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a small-scale fisherman from Madagascar. As in all African countries, it is small-scale fishing that feeds the population by landing fish for local consumption. Unfortunately, this is not sufficient. It is impossible for us to supply the population sufficiently with food, specifically fish.
4,24 kilo isan'olo isan-taona fotsiny izany. Kely dia kely io taha io raha ohariny any Nosy Maurice, izay 20 kilo isan'olo isan-taona. Ary koa 60 kilo isan'olo isan-taona ho any Nosy Seychelles.
à Madagascar, la consommation
In Madagascar, fish consumption is very low, 4.26 kilo per person per year, while 20 kilos of fish per year per person in Mauritius and 60 kilos per person per year in the Seychelles.
Entimana eo ampelantananay sy any amin'ny toerana misy anay mba hahafahanay mikarakara ny vokatra an-dranomasina mba tsy hasimba izany. Toa ireo vatapampangatsiahana sy ny fitahirizam-bokotra. Anika miteraka fahasimban'ny vokatra omen'ireo mpanjifa izany ka mety hiteraka aretina ho azy ireo.
à Madagascar,
In Madagascar, we lack the means to preserve fish, such as the cold chain, and the fish often reaches the consumer in poor condition, which can make it sick, and it can make the consumers sick too.
Manan-karena trondro. Fa toan'ireo firenena sasany aty Afrika dia ny jony vaventy izay anjakan'ireo sambo vahiny no matetika misitrika ireo arenan-dranomasina ireo. Ary ny vokatra azon'izy ireo dia entina matsihana ny tsena iraisam-pirenena. Hita taritra izany tranga izany amin'ireo sambo vaventy vondrona Europeana izay manjony lamatra rehefa manao fifanarana miasa eo amin'izeo ireo Madagasikara amin'izany jony lamatra izany.
pourtant, les eaux de Madagascar sont
Nevertheless, Madagascar's waters are rich in fish, but as in many African countries, fish is caught by foreign boats, and this kind of fish is exported. This is the case for the tuna, which is caught by European boats fishing under the fisheries agreement.
Amatsian'ireo sambo vaventy ny vondrona Europeana ireo ny tsena anatiny amin'ireo vokatra ankoatrany lamatra izay azon'ireo mba ahafahany malagasy misitrika izany vokatra izany amin'ny vidiny mirary dia mirary.
Nous souhaitons que ces bateaux tonniers se
We would like European tuna boats to land fake tuna in Madagascar, which could then be sold locally at a price people can afford.
Na sasany aty Afrikana toany Mauritanie dia 200 amin'ireo trondro jonon'ireo sambo vaventy dia natokana hamatsiana ny tsena anatiny ary nahafan'ireo mamatsy trondro any ponina ao aminy mba hanalefana ny tsy fanjariany sakafo.
Dans d'autres pays africains comme la Mauritanie, le débarquement de 2% des captures de petits pélagiques pour la population locale a permis de mieux approvisionner sa population locale en poissons et aussi d'améliorer leur sécurité alimentaire.
In other African countries, such as Mauritania, lending 22% of small pelagic catches for the local population has helped improve fish supplies and food security for local communities.
Panjony madinika mamatsy trondro tsara kalitao ho any ireo malagasy rehetra. Mankasitraka indrindra tompo.
À travers l'accord de pêche entre
Through the fisheries agreements between Madagascar and the European Union, the European Union should also pay attention to supporting infrastructures for the conservation of small-scale fish to enable small-scale fishermen to offer local consumers abundant, good quality fish. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the next topic, transparency. I'm going to give the floor to Nancy Onginyojo, who is a fisherwoman, and she's the president of the Association of Fishermen, Fisherwomen, and Boats Association. I'm going to speak English.
The topic I want to address has been a priority for us all for a very long time, and that is of transparency. Our country's fishing agreements with the European Union are clearly at the top in terms of transparency. Both the text of the EU agreement and that of the fisheries agreement evaluations are accessible. On the other hand, a large number of access agreements with other foreign countries or companies have remained confidential, and these agreements can have a substantial impact on small-scale fisheries and national food security. In fact, in many countries, basic information on how many industrial vessels are licensed, what quantities of fish they are allowed to catch, and how much is kept confidential or obscured from the general public. Therefore, it is of public interest that the text of all fishing arrangements, whether they are bilateral agreements, joint ventures, or chartering, are made public. In my country, the Seychelles, the fact that we joined the Fisheries Transparency Initiative, the FITI, have helped improve the standards of publication of information. However, we see that even if the texts of the EU fishing agreements with African countries are available, they are not in a format that the public and fishing communities can understand. It will be thus crucial for the EU and our country to actively share the contents of these agreements with the public, working with the press, or having dedicated meetings with stakeholders. This will help clarify a number of misunderstandings regarding the various aspects of the agreements, including access conditions and sectorial support. I want to stress that for us small-scale fishers, transparency regarding fisheries agreement is not an end in itself. It is an ingredient to enable informed participation of stakeholders in the management of fishing activities in Africa. Since the last common fisheries policy reform, our participation to fisheries agreement has improved. Small-scale fishing and civil society organizations are increasingly consulted by the EU, both in carrying out of the fishing agreements evaluation and during agreements negotiations. For future, however, we would like to see that these stakeholders' consultation become more systematic, and also for us to be around the table during these joint committee meetings that examine the implementation of fisheries agreement. For transparency to work in favor of the artisanal fishers, it is not only about publishing information, it is also about gathering data on artisanal fisheries. A major challenge facing our sector is the lack of reliable information on its contributions to livelihoods. Often, credible information on the small-scale sector is simply not being collated. For example, very little is documented regarding the work of women in the sector. Statistics on artisanal sector, its catches, its contribution to national economy and to the food security is scarce. Through its fisheries partnership, the EU should provide increased support to data collection on the small-scale sector. We need to increase the visibility of the small-scale fisheries to showcase its importance. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup et on va passer.
Thank you so much. sectoral support, Mauritania now. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you for having me and for your speeches that focus on the main issues of small case fisheries. And thank you for the questions that were raised and that should be answered. Ladies and gentlemen, one aspect of fisheries agreements that is very important to small-scale fishing is sectoral support, but there are shortcomings in terms of transparency, but also in terms of implementation. We do not know what is being done with the sectoral support money. We do not know if the actions that are supported are effective. No representative of small-scale fishing or of civil society is involved in the planning of these activities or in the way they are implemented or in their evaluation. The actions that are supported by sectoral support are not easy to identify, and often they are presented as the initiative of local politicians without mentioning the EU. Under these conditions, you shouldn't be surprised to hear that African public opinion does not always have a good opinion of the European Union as a partner in the fisheries industry. Our fish is being caught by European fleets, but we do not get any benefit in return. On the other hand, support actions carried out by other countries are clearly identifiable by everyone, and these initiatives are not always important in terms of sustainability. It is crucial that detailed information is made available to the public about what is done with the money from sectoral support of the fishery agreements. And it is important to involve stakeholders in the identification, implementation and evaluation of these actions if they are to be effective and benefit our populations. It is a question of credibility for the European Union, which should be able to show that the money of European citizens is well spent to support sustainable fishing. As for the sectoral support actions, it is important to ensure that part of these funds is used to support small-scale fishing, which is very important for many European countries. Concrete actions should be taken to help small-scale fisheries and fishermen, such as training captains to ensure safety at sea, or supporting co-management initiatives, such as participatory surveillance. Through sectoral support, it is important to support the consumption of fish by local population, given that it is often women who bring the fish to the consumer. A major focus of sectoral support should be on supporting women's activities. Women are present at all stages of the small-scale fishing supply chain in Africa. However, their work is not recognized, their contribution is not valued, and their working conditions are terrible. Sectoral support from the EU should contribute to investments in services and infrastructure to improve the living conditions of women and their families, such as access to drinking water, electricity, sanitary facilities at processing sites, sewage disposals, and solar refrigerators. However, there is one condition. These small-scale fishermen and women are not faced with an emptying sea. This is a condition that remains. This is the case today in West Africa with our small pelagic fish that continue to be devoured by the meal industry, the fish meal industry. We are grateful to the European Union for the concerns of our population about the dangers posed by the industrial production of fish oil and fish meal from these small pelagics. Thank you to the European Union. So the attention given in the sectoral support for the Mauritanian agreement to actions to use small pelagics for human consumptions rather than fish meal is to be welcome. But European policies should be consistent. Today, it takes 5 kilos of small pelagic fish to make just 1 kilo of fish meal, which is used to feed farmed fish that is sold in Europe. So if Europe does not stop the entry onto its market of these fish bred with the fish meal of our small pelagics, then European Union, like China, Norway and Turkey, will deprive the women processors and they will starve the people of West Africa. Thank you.
Merci à vous. On a soulevé.
Thank you so much. So we have discussed 4 items on fisheries agreements. I would like to underline that we also have Gao Su, who is chairman of GAOPA and Fishnet, which is the non-state African fisheries platform, as Mr. Judex Pompol, who is a fisherman in Mauritius and chairman of the Fishing Senegas, as well as Mr. Gao Su, who is a member of the Coastal Women in Fisheries Association, the young coastal fisher women entrepreneur, which works towards a better awareness of their rights. So we have a few minutes left. Maybe we can do Q&A. If you have a question to ask, please do not hesitate to raise your hand.
Merci.
And so, yes, thank you.
Le Parlement, Madame.
I would like to thank the European Parliament, Mrs. Catherine and Mrs. Chabot, for giving us the opportunity to establish a dialogue with Europe. I would like to congratulate all my colleagues who took the floor, and peace be upon the world. I think we're facing a true governance issue when it comes to fisheries in our countries. 8 years ago, I said that when we added to the support of joint ventures back then, we wanted it to be an open door. We cannot give it to Europeans and not to other actors. And this is a really important issues for us today, especially with Chinese, Korean, and Russian vessels. And most of them, these are front joint ventures, and they are fishing our fish, small-scale fish, in order to transform it into fish meal and fish oil. There is no transparency at all here, and there is no understanding between these countries and the EU. The only protocol we have is the one we have with the EU, and the EU itself falls victim to its own transparency, if you wish. So what do we need to do to be able to meet this challenge? I believe that we all need to work together against these front companies. Because let's take the example of fish meal. And it's not the first time I'm saying this, and my colleague actually mentioned it when talking about 5 kilograms of fresh fish for 1 kilogram of fish meal. And earlier on, my colleague from Madagascar said that people in Madagascar only consume 4 kilograms a year. But you need 25 kilograms of fresh fish for 1 kilograms of fish that can actually be eaten. So you see that if we have these numbers, Catherine is going to go to a restaurant and eat within 30 minutes what I, as an African, eat in an entire year. So we really need to understand whether it is truly necessary to continue eating salmon based on fish meal. If this takes the fish right out of other humans' mouth, and this is such an important source of protein for us. And to this, I need to add the issue of pollution with all the rejects into sea waters. We need to have a preserved zone for small-scale fishing because we have oil and gas industry coming to our countries, and it's going to be really difficult if we do not have an exclusive zone in order to be able not only to capture fish, but also to feed them. And this is why we actually launched our call for action, to ask our governments and the international community to act now, because it is small-scale fisheries that feed the world, not industrial fishing. 80% of the fish that gets on our table comes from small-scale fisheries. You were mentioning, Madam, who were working with oyster in Guinea-Bissau, in Conakry. And today there has been an amazing destruction of the mangrove. And I think we all need to join our forces to work against these brutal tendencies. And this is why we have come together in order to find a clear list of actions to take immediately if we want to preserve small-scale fisheries on our coast. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to take the floor? I think we have someone online, maybe, Mohamed Ali, who represents fishermen and the fisheries departments in Somalia. No, our colleague left us. Catherine, you had something to add. Yes, I have a few questions, and you too, Caroline, I believe. So thank you to each and every one of you. It was fantastic being able to listen to you. It is my understanding that we have fisheries agreements with third countries, which are globally quite positive. Then again, we could, look at our imports in fish meal. But beyond that, all the reports that are being redacted on fisheries agreement, everything that has been acted in sectoral reports in support of women, of training and infrastructure, everything is mentioned in our reports to the European Commission. And in my opinion, I believe that the European Union is working rather well. Then again, I have a question, because the issue here is that it is your states that have to be asked for what you actually need. So if we put pressure on the states to ask them for more transparency on the money that has been given to them through sectoral support, and I have been asking these questions many times, the sovereignty of a state that is asked by the European Union, Senegal, Mauritania, and Guinea-Bissau can obviously trade with whoever they want. And when we ask them to maybe look a little closer to your relationship with China and Russia, we get criticized for it. So I know that you will be able to talk to DG Mare tomorrow. And I know that it will be very interesting because the European representative for Western Africa is in Brussels, and he just sent me a message because I told him about this event. So he will be there. He will be actively listening to you, so you can tell him what your needs are. But what is the message, the narrative that you really want to relay from your governments? Please, I apologize for being so direct, but because I believe that we're already doing quite a lot, but we need to do even more, especially when it comes to fish meal. Then again, I don't really understand how we can go even further. So I apologize for this quite direct question. Well, I believe it's a wonderful question. You are so right for asking it, because we, in turn, ask Europe to apply pressure. And you talk about sovereignty, but let's not forget that the money that we get is money that comes from European taxpayers. And we were talking about non-discriminatory clauses earlier. And in that respect, I believe that we should work towards greater transparency and make all the information accessible to the general public. Let's take an example in Senegal. When the European Parliament adopted the agreement, at the very same moment, professional and civil society organizations were advocating to raise the issue of Chinese vessels. But for a fisherman, all the vessels that are in our territorial waters are European vessels. So there is a true issue of communication because it's the EP that adopted this agreement. We talked about it in the press. And we told the people that the vessel they see are actually European and not Chinese. So probably here it's an issue of communication. It's not an issue of telling our states to do something or some. We have signed agreements and that's all well and done. We have sectoral support as well, but we also need a committee with all the stakeholders present and have very clear indications. And obviously, if the information coming from us is not clear, then the European Union has the right to say, okay, the funds that we gave you were not used in the way we want them to be. But when we talk about that, it is intervention on our part. So at least that's what's being told. So, our position as European Union is quite complicated right now. You just said it. We consider that all the vessels that you can find in your territorial vessels are from the European Union. Obviously, the European Union itself does not always communicate very well to local population on what is being done at our level. What do the various associations think? So I'd like to come back to sectoral support and its transparency, because there are quite a few issues here. So it is true that we have a partly responsibility in how we distribute funds through sectoral approach and support. We give them if they are well used, obviously. And in Seychelles, a pier has been constructed for small-scale fishing. And then we see that small-scale fishers do not have access to this pier. And in Guinea-Bissau, we financed a laboratory, but nobody works there because nobody is being trained to work there. So at some point, we need to ask ourselves the right questions. Yes, we use sectoral support, but on the other hand, the local people, populations and communities need to tell us what they truly need. When I went to Senegal, I saw that a roof had been constructed on a building, but it was totally inadequate in terms of construction material because we did not ask the local communities what they need. So it really wasn't up to par at all. So I believe we are partly responsible for this, and we need to beef up transparency and assessment and checks on how the funds are actually being used. Kamel Hugo, I have a question on professional integration, especially when it comes to women and training. I actually talked about a few of these agreements at PECH committee, and I was wondering what the priorities are in Madagascar for this agreement, and would also like to know what kind of feedback you need in Madagascar.
Ia, i Madagascar zegny amin'ny resaka accord de la pêche reto, izy resaka les moyens zegny tsy ampy, faible, manky be zay le moyen amin'ny resaka be reto, indrindra resaka amin'ny fotodrafitrasa vata fampangatsiahana ny conservena le trondro zegny mba tsy hasimba izy mba en bonne qualité zegny izy amin'ny hoanigny.
Oui, pour le cas de Madagascar.
Yes, for Madagascar, small-scale fishermen hope that when it comes to the agreement with the EU, sectoral support will aim at supporting small-scale fisheries in Madagascar, and we have about 100,000 small-scale fishermen and women in Madagascar. And as it was mentioned before, the infrastructure is of paramount importance, as well as the cold chain as well, because this will allow fishermen to better keep their product in order to feed the local markets. Does anyone else wish to take the floor? Because I would like to give the floor to the European Commission.
Votre question est pertinente. Et la réponse...
Your question is relevant. As we have agreements, we are partners.
Dans les... un droit de regard. Et je pense que l'argument de dire que, bon, voilà, ça c'est de l'ingérence, je ne pense pas que ça pose ici. Surtout que vous avez imposé déjà l'article de non-discrimination. Donc, je pense...
Also the non-discriminatory article. So, you are partners. You imposed the fact that any vessel coming to Mauritania must comply with specific conditions. This is quite important. And so it is not a matter of interference, in my opinion. And what we do here, what we're doing here, we do it with our governments too. We are here today because we like to understand how things are progressing. And you asked the question about professional integration of young people in the fisheries sector, specifically small-scale fisheries, and the situation is not very promising for young people because yields have been decreasing. Working conditions are more and more tight, and so there are many things that are an actual obstacle to the development of small-scale fishery.
Okay, my name is Dorcas from Kenya. My question is, what are the requirements or the conditions for a country to have an agreement with the European Union? What are the requirements or any condition that a country will require to have in order to have an agreement with the European Union? Yeah.
Merci.
It's an excellent question. Before giving the floor to Mr. Berg, I'd like to thank him because he's here with us today. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I'm going to give you the floor. This is an excellent question, which is the requirements, which are the requirements, which are the conditions to sign a fisheries agreement.
Oui, bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this initiative and thank you for taking the time to come to Brussels. I think that this debate is really exciting because we have identified many challenges and issues that relate to small-scale fisheries in terms of transparency, fish stocks, communication. As you mentioned, there will be a meeting at the DG Mare tomorrow, and we can't wait to talk to you so that we have more time to focus on the details of these important topics. Some general remarks. Catherine Chapeau is here with me, and she's in charge of the agreements with Madagascar, Gabon, and Ivory Coast, and other countries, and she knows these countries very well. The fisheries agreements are very important, but we should put them into the context. It is just one element of our policy. There are many different actions that are being implemented bilaterally, regionally, and in order to tackle illegal fisheries. These are complementary topics. At the very beginning, regional rules were mentioned, and many decisions are made on a regional level, and there are scientific opinions that are issued about a specific fish stock, and we shouldn't just focus on China.
Courageuse.
Our position is quite brave from different point of views, and there are many examples that could be mentioned. So we have always done a good job, so we should question what other countries do. Iran, for instance, has a big fleet, and Indonesia has a big fleet. So there are regional players on top of China that are very important and that should not be neglected. As for the IUU, this is a priority for us. We want to fight against illegal fisheries. And we do it because we want to ensure that honest fishermen and fisherwomen, including small-scale fishermen and fisherwomen, could have enough resources. So this is why there's a dialogue which is in progress with many countries like Ghana and other countries all over the world. So this is an essential element of our policy, and sometimes it takes years because there are different interests in political and economic terms, and there are sovereign states which are not always willing to make the necessary efforts. As for bilateral agreements, governance has been mentioned several times today, and to us, governance is key. The example of Madagascar is very important. During our negotiations, we involved the NGOs from the local country, and this is something that is very important to us, but this is against the positions and the choices of the governments we negotiate with, because it's up to these governments to decide whether to involve local communities, NGOs or not. And if NGOs are involved, it is essential. In Guinea-Bissau and in Ivory Coast, I've had the opportunity to meet many NGOs and representatives of local communities. And the Madagascar agreement will enter into force in July, and it is important for us to organize exchanges and meetings, informal and formal meetings with local small-scale fishermen and fisherwomen, so that we can take into account their concerns. Fisheries agreements are not against small-scale fisheries, but they promote the establishment of a governance regulatory frame that involves small-scale fisheries as well. You've said it several times, small-scale fisheries are the backbone of the economy and the food security of many countries. So we do want this kind of involvement, the involvement of local communities, of NGOs. I think this is really useful. I could elaborate on some specific topics. Communication. Communication is essential. How do we communicate about what we do? This is something we always say. The projects we finance should be recognized and should be labeled as projects that are co-financed by the European Union. But it should be repeated, and we should fight so that this is done. And this is essential for us. Maybe we can do more to explain what we do with these agreements, because sometimes there are so many follow-up meetings. But during the Salon de la Pêche, we presented a document per country that summarizes the content of the fishery agreement. So that's the legal text, but it is important to say what we actually do with these agreements locally. And
des flottes, elle est assez modeste par rapport.
And sometimes our fleet, European fleets, do not play such an important role in these countries, unlike the fleets from other countries. As for the surplus, it is considered regionally. And then we have mixed agreements in which the surplus should be part of the evaluation, specifically with Mauritania and Guinea-Bissau. A meeting will be held in June. Then the tuna agreements do provide for surplus use, but this is considered regionally. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And as for Kenya, of course,
Express des deux parties.
There should be the willingness from the two parties. It could come from Kenya in this case, so it is up to Kenya to tell us that they wanted to be part of a fishery agreement. There was some dialogues in the past, but this interest should be confirmed by the Kenyan government officially, and there should be an interest from our fleet too, because our fleet does not catch fish everywhere. It's got priorities. These are the main conditions. Willingness from the third party country, then there should be an interest by our fleet, and there should be funds enough. But the two first conditions are essential. Thank you. Any other questions? Happy that a meeting will take place tomorrow with the DG Mare so that you have time to focus on the details of the issues you experience. I'm going to give the floor to Catherine Chabot for a final speech. Thank you, Caroline. First of all, thank you so much, and thank you to our teams that helped us organize this event. Claudio is here from the Secretariat of the PECH Committee. I'd like to wrap up by focusing on 5 topics. Topic number 1, this is just a remark. Small-scale fisheries are an issue in the EU too. So the preservation and the recognition of small-scale coastal fisheries is essential. So this is a topic we deal with in the EU too. So this is a common issue and a common concern. So reinforcement of knowledge, this is a topic that is mentioned several times. I was rapporteur for my group for fisheries agreements, so data are essential, data collection, and the impact of climate change and pollution on fish resources. I had an opportunity to talk to some scientific community representatives and researchers that talked about how fish migrate. So sectoral support could be very important from this point of view too. Second element I'd like to focus on, the integrated approach. Fisheries agreements are part of the EU policy with third countries. And integrated approaches are essential to me.
Je pense que quand on regarde l'appui sectoriel, on doit aussi considérer que les pêcheurs, et ça a été dit, je crois par madame ou tout à l'heure, ou moi-même je l'ai dit, participent à la préservation de la mangrove, à la préservation du milieu du milieu, et donc répondent non seulement aux enjeux de biodiversité, mais aux enjeux climatiques, parce que si les écosystèmes marins côtiers sont dégradés, ils sont émetteurs. S'ils sont préservés, ça permet de développer aussi une économie.
Biodiversity is preserved and a local sustainable economy can be promoted. Then another element I'd like to mention, we should reinforce our communication. It was an element which was mentioned in my report. The European Union is not good at communicating about what we do locally. When I visited the small-scale fish harbor in Guinea-Bissau,
une espèce de machine.
There was a sort of machine that was full of waste. There was boards in Chinese, and there was no board, no sign that mentioned the EU, even if we had funded many of the works there. So what should we do to communicate? So we should make the most of what we do. It is true for fisheries, but it's true for other fields as well. And it is important to talk about our values. Otherwise, we should stop signing these fisheries agreements, because, in my opinion, we shouldn't do that. If we are not there, Russia, Korea, and China could play a much more important role. And then, this is a global topic. Your call for action is great. And you all came here to Brussels. I'm so grateful.
C'est un sujet global.
This call for action is great. This is a global topic. The next UN conference in 2025 is co-organized by Costa Rica and France. I do not know what agenda will be approved, but the defense of small-scale fisheries should be brought to the attention of global leaders. And
la COP 15.
During the COP 15, preserving biodiversity globally, 3% of protected marine areas. And then there's an agreement to preserve biodiversity in oceans. There is just one ocean worldwide, regardless of where we live. We just have one ocean. It is a common asset, and we should preserve it all together to benefit the local coastal communities you represent.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm not going to repeat what you have just said. I would like to thank the Commission for being here with us today. All of you, fishermen, fisherwomen, processors, women processors, and all of you who work closely with small-scale fisheries. In order to align these agreements on the SDGs, we need to respect quite a few criteria. Food security of the country, the place of women in fisheries agreements, the human rights, fish stocks, and really listening to scientific experts as well, but also take into account direct competition between industrial and small-scale fishing, transparency, IUU fishing, fighting IUU fishing, and being able to have a true follow-up of sexual support, control of European vessels. And in conclusion, I think we need to rethink our partnerships and really listen to coastal communities. Today, I believe that it is very important to take all of this into account, give more visibility to local small-scale fishing communities in terms of international negotiations, but all within the countries themselves in their cooperation with the European Union. So I hope that tomorrow's meeting will give you even more food for thought, and I'm looking forward to continue working with you on these agreements. We really need to listen to you and to take all your issues into account. Thank you so much for being here today.